This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. We are back with another episode of the best podcast about the dark side of creativity, Art of Darkness. I'm Kevin Kautzman. This is Brad Kelly. This is a core episode. This is an unusual core episode because it is the first part 2 that we've done. We did F. Scott Fitzgerald, part 1, last year, 2023, in beautiful St. Paul, Minnesota. Scotty's hometown. Brad, that was a lot of fun, wasn't it? When we did it live.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. That was cool to, you do stuff on the internet and it's like, it's actually a real thing too.
Yeah.
It's just cool to do. It's good to see people and we had a good time and I think a lot of other people had a good time. So, yeah.
Right. And now we're going to pick it up. Minnesota's favorite alcoholic foot guy.
Who else is in those rankings, do you think?
I'm not, listen, this isn't the confessional, so I'm not gonna say anything. And obviously the greatest writer this state has ever produced, one of the greatest writers that this country has ever produced. Brad, I'm really excited to do this. You just knocked out the Marquis de Sade for patrons. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, we released a little preview of that. 4 hours, 30 minutes on the Marquis. How are you feeling a day after that, Brad? You feel good?
I'm glad to be done with it. I'm glad I don't got to read anymore about it. Or especially his work. The biographical material is pretty interesting to read, actually. But you've run out of, for me anyway. I said this in the Telegram channel. I did not realize how squeamish I am until I read this book, until I read 120 Days of Sodom and some of the other stuff. So I'm glad to be done with it. Yeah. But I don't know, I got through all 120 days of Sodom and all I got was the frights.
We need a t-shirt. I read 120 Days of Sodom and all I got was this stupid shirt. Maybe we'll do that. We have a very simple bonfire store. It's all at artofdarkpod.com. This is a core episode. If you want to get the Marquis de Sade episode, that is for patrons, patreon.com/artofdarkpod, and now on Substack too, and that's substack.com/@artofdarkpod. Everything's at artofdarkpod.com. You're not going to want to miss that one. I've been hearing on the back channel that some people have appreciated the humor that we brought to the de Sade episode. They were like, I'm not going to name names, but one person specifically said, "Thank you for bringing the humor to that episode. Otherwise, I would have stopped listening." And totally true.
Rightfully so.
We always say we laugh so we don't cry, but an episode like that, that was as close as we've come to a serial killer kind of psychology on this podcast so far, and just a total absolute mess. And then all that weird high-minded defense of him and this idea that he's some sort of an important writer, I guess, because they say so. It's very interesting, very strange. So there it is. Thank you for listening to Art of Darkness. I'm very excited to bring you Fitzgerald Part 2. If you haven't listened to part, it's good. If you haven't listened to Part 1, you're going to be fine. But you could also pause this, go listen to Part 1, come back. It's been a while since Part 1. I'm going to start with the opening question anyway. Brad, what do you know about F. Scott Fitzgerald?
Yeah, great American writer. One of the sort of Mount Rushmore of modernist American writers. So coming from that sort of, what generation is that? The silent generation? Who are they?
No, they're like the jazz age. The jazz age. Yeah.
Great Gatsby, which is an incredible novel. Full stop. assigned in high school reading. So it's kind of like one of these things that has sort of fully entered the cultural consciousness, and rightfully so. Uh, it's kind of also
I think
like
they
a
called them the Lost Generation.
that's the word I was looking for. Yes, yes, yes.
Hmm.
Right, the Lost Generation. Like also was a celebrity in his day, partially due to his, his marriage to Zelda, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in depth. Died tragically young. Clearly troubled guy. But talent was incredible. Kind of had a pretty, if I remember right, also like a rapid rise to success. It
Yes.
was very,
Yes.
very quick, which is actually maybe not the best for one's longevity. I think we have seen in a number of cases. Um, from Minnesota originally. Um, Other than that, beyond kind of what we touched on in the live episode, which we only kind of did the front, maybe the first act of his life or so, I don't know a whole lot of specifics.
All right, we're going to get into it.
Yeah.
This Side of Paradise, the first novel, made
Yeah.
him wicked famous. I mean, it made him a household name overnight. And from Minnesota, was raised in New York State, in part back to Minnesota, was a Princeton man, served in the military briefly, but never saw action. Kind of always lived to regret that. He regretted, and of course, we're going to come to the point where he, with his friendship, his frenemy situation with Hemingway. We're going to come to that. He always sort of regretted not playing football and not going to war. So these are
Mm.
things that he was a little hung up about because, of course, Hemingway, was big pugilistic guy and had obviously had gone to war.
Yeah, it's got to be
Um,
tough just getting mogged by Hemingway constantly. Just like even if you're outwriting him, he's still like can kick your ass. It's like not a it's not a good situation.
Yeah, yeah. And just to recap really briefly, the what we covered in part one, he had like a relationship with a woman named Ginevra King, and fell madly in love with Zelda Sayre, the debutante from the South, Episcopalian, and inaccessible. He couldn't. His courtship was abortive until the novel hit and was a huge success, and now we can get married because you can look
Yeah.
after me, even though we're going to go over that kind of beat by beat. I'm going to say
Mhm.
in the running for the worst marriage of all time.
Yeah.
And in terms of destructiveness, when you think about The Great Gatsby and just how great it was and is,
Mhm.
for many, many will say, like next to Faulkner, maybe
Mhm.
it is like typically in the top five, top 10 greatest American novels. Many will say it's the greatest.
Mhm.
Uh, if you want to make a north south divide, you could say it's maybe the greatest novel written by a Northerner.
Mhm.
It's staggeringly great, and nothing else in his body of work compares.
Right.
And one of the major reasons for this is this very, very troubled marriage. Now, it's not her fault. This isn't about casting blame. We're not trying to
Mhm.
do a Yoko Ono. So not that we would even do that to Yoko, but you understand. We're not. This isn't about casting blame. It takes two to tango,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they were obviously very young. She was a celebrity before they were even married. I'm going to
Oh,
come to it at some point, but I think she was like the prom queen at three or four different universities. Like
it's like a
Sewanee, the
professional.
university. She was like it'd be like Ms. Alabama today, Ms. North
Right.
Dakota, Ms. whatever, like that level of kind of
Yeah.
beauty and poise and grace and culture and wealth. I mean, I believe her father was a judge, so we'll get into all of that as we go along. It's going to be a raucous tale. The other point I'm going to make is that The Great Gatsby isn't. It doesn't really glamorize it. It's
Mhm.
not about glamorizing it, and people
Mhm.
sort of get it all wrong. I think he was. You think you read that novel, and it is a warning. It is a very, very stark warning. And yes, they tried to live up to this image, and he ended up writing for magazines, these throwaway stories for magazines because he could make a lot of money doing it. be almost like the equivalent of like selling out and going to write TV, going to write bad TV in Hollywood. And one of the reasons he had to do that ultimately was to pay for Zelda's treatments. We're gonna come to that as well.
Okay,
So
okay.
they lived extravagantly, and at one point, I think he was making 10 times the average salary, and they still couldn't, like, from the sale of a novel.
Mhm.
And I think it was like Gatsby. He only made 10 times the average salary. Wasn't enough. It'd be like
That's
making
yeah.
$500,000. Can't live. I
Yeah.
can't live like this.
Right. Oh man. Oh
So
man. What a
so
well,
I
that's the trap
yeah.
that's the trap of wealth sometimes for some people, right? It's sort of like you get pushed, you go through that turnstile of, suddenly you're making that much and well, it turns out it doesn't go back the other way. Yeah. Got
He
staff and
he
clothes and
was yeah, he was never going to be the type, and especially with Zelda, I don't think he was ever going to be the type to move back to Minnesota, get a little bungalow, and
Mhm.
let that money compound for 10 years. I don't think
Right.
that was never in the cards for
Mhm.
him. And it was a huge, huge
Mhm.
problem.
Right.
A profligate Irish Catholic lad from St. Paul, Minnesota.
The only one. The only one I've ever heard of.
So yeah, I'm kind of going out of order, but there you go. Obviously, we got a little housekeeping real quick before we dig into the proper bio and do this. Buckle up. This is going to be some hours. I'm really excited. This is a big one for me. Uh, let's see, Brad, we're going to do a live show in October
October
26th.
26th, Planet Ant Theater, Hamtramck. Come on down. We're talking about the death of Houdini. We're gonna make it a good time. It's gonna be Halloween themed. We're gonna be in costumes as yet undisclosed what those are. Should be a blast. Yeah, come on down. It's gonna be fun.
We got to figure out how to get you into a fat suit that can float because we're going to make you Baron Harkonnen.
Baron Harkonnen would be legit.
Wouldn't that be cool?
I can just start I can just start putting down the calories right now.
you gotta start.
Just do
You gotta
total
start
method.
bulking,
Yeah,
bulking.
I'm gonna method act this thing, man. It's gonna be
Amazing.
6 months of Baron Harkonnen.
Charcoal baths. Yeah, very hide the knives, hide the
Right.
knives. Yeah, so that's October 26th. Tickets have not gone on sale yet. When they do, the first people to know will be the patrons, Patreon and Substack. And speaking of that, every episode we do an after dark. The after dark for this is going to be protracted. Here's some of the things we're going to talk about on the after dark. We'll talk about it in the main episode too, most of this stuff, but we're going to go deeper into these things. We're going to talk more about Fitzgerald and Hemingway and their very unusual relationship. There are the famous anecdotes. Fitzgerald asking Hemingway if his penis is normal.
Right.
Fitzgerald holding the clock too long on a round of boxing until Hemingway got the shit kicked out of him by somebody else. What really happened there? Those are sort of famous stories, but there are other stories, and
Mm.
they were entwined. Their careers kind of ran parallel, and I still contend that I think Fitzgerald wrote the finer single novel, but obviously Hemingway's body of work is a greater
Mhm.
body of work. Very
Fair
tricky,
enough. Yeah.
and interesting. We're going to talk about Poe's
Oh,
influence on. Yeah, and their sort of parallel, interesting careers. Poe, I think, kind of invented the American literary drunk, I think is what
yeah.
some people were saying. Yeah.
I
And
think that's fair.
Fitzgerald perfected it. Like, if you're gonna be an alcoholic, Fitzgerald was the kind of alcoholic where Zelda would be, we're going to get to it. She was in and out of, like, I think it's 11 hospitals in 6 years. I mean, she went cuckoo
Oh
for Cocoa
gosh.
Puffs. The
Yeah.
diagnosis was schizophrenia, but now
Mhm.
looking back, they say BPD.
Yeah.
And I think the person who diagnosed her schizophrenic is the guy who invented the term, who was, so it's like,
He
yes,
invented the term schizophrenia.
he invented the term schizophrenia,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Well, when you're Dr. Schizophrenia, everybody looks like a
every
schizophrenic.
100%. That's what I'm saying. Exactly. All I see everywhere are podcasters. It's Malkovich, Malkovich, Malkovich. I see somebody, I go, hey, you should start a podcast.
Yeah.
Why don't you start a podcast? Podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the fellow was one of Jung's teachers too.
Oh, okay.
And the same doctor who treated Joyce's daughter. as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he, at a certain point, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. One of the things about this is that these are all stories, and people, I think, tune into Art of Darkness obviously for the bios, but like we're just telling stories about these great figures so that you can maybe understand them better and get more of a picture of it than these like glossy, glitzy presentations they make of particularly Gatsby. I think Hollywood has never done Gatsby. They've never done it properly. I doubt they ever will. They glamorize it, and then it's all maudlin and goofy. Just read the novel, and then read about Fitzgerald if you really want to understand it. But yeah, that doctor recommended to both Joyce and Fitzgerald, to stop drinking. And Fitzgerald was the kind of, alcoholic who's like, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. And he's a cliche. He's like, I need it to be creative. Well,
yeah.
Okay, what kind of creativity were you writing another Gatsby, or were you writing a throwaway story for the Saturday Evening Post to make $3,000 to pay for more booze and Zelda's treatment? So there it is. But I mean, he was a serious alcoholic, like a life and death alcoholic, like it killed him, like rock and roll, not good. Smashing hotel rooms, getting into fights, ended up in jail, ended up in hospitals. Bad news. Okay. So on the After Dark for Patreon and Substack, we're going to talk more about the alcoholism. I got a dumb article, the bedroom quirks of famous authors, because we got to stop at the foot fetish, man. It was such a relief to finally find our first foot guy when we did, because now I can sleep at night.
Right. You knew
with my socks on.
Right.
And then finally on the After Dark, I'm going to go into more details about Zelda's horrific death. Do you know how Zelda Fitzgerald died?
I don't actually. No.
Okay. We're gonna talk about it. It'll probably come up on the core, but if it doesn't, it's going to be on the After Dark. That's for Patreon. Patreon also gets access to the book club, Patreon and Substack. Book club this weekend. We're going to be doing Hamlet. We're going to talk about the Hamlet version, or the Branagh version of Hamlet, and all the details of that are at artofdarkpod.com. We got some fun stuff coming up for the book club. Those are Zoom. If you want to join, you can join. If you don't, we record them. It's extra stuff. We got Hamlet coming up. We're going to do Stella Maris and the Passenger around the McCarthy episode. We're going to do Billy Budd, Melville, The Left-Handed Darkness, Le Guin, and then we added in December Dune, because I need an excuse to reread Dune.
All 13 parts of no.
Yeah.
just the first
just the first one. Yeah. My Arrakis, my podcast, my Dune. All right. My book club.
Dune. Love me Arrakis.
Just love my Dune. Yeah, right. Love my Dune. Love my Dune. Love my Chris knife.
Love my spice.
Love my spice. My space witches. Simple as. All right. Thanks for listening to the housekeeping. Telegram t.me/artofdarkpod. And thanks for listening. Last thing before we really get into it. Source material, Wikipedia. I've got there's a book called Sometimes Madness is Wisdom. That's about the marriage of Zelda and Scott. And the period that I'm principally going to cover in part 2 here is from where we left off in part 1, kind of when they get married through to when she has her first mental breakdown. And then we're going to speed run the sort of last 10 years of his life in Hollywood, being a mediocre screenwriter. Because I think once we get to her snap, we're kind of like, he would have a couple additional affairs in Hollywood and things, and we'll cover it, but I think once she snaps, it's like, all right, we can kind of move on. I've got what do I have here? I've got Hemingway versus Fitzgerald, which is exactly what it sounds like. The rise and fall of a literary friendship. Man, I can't wait until our book comes out, Brad. Pulp versus Slick. The rise and fall of a podcast empire. It'll be very. It's just going to be poetry. It's going to be poetry. It's going to be a collection of haiku.
Yeah, collection of haiku.
From the greatest anons on Twitter.
as people
I
just spurging out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
exactly. Yeah, 100%. And then I've got this book, Scott Fitzgerald by Meyers, and this is a very good biography. I'm principally going to use that, and then the
Oh, wait, who's the author of that?
Jeffrey
Oh,
Myers,
it's the homie. He wrote the Conrad biography, the great Conrad biography. I'm pretty sure he's the man. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
real biographer, and we are
Yeah.
not biographers. This is a profiling podcast. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's another major influence on
Mm,
Fitzgerald, Conrad, and
yeah.
he Myers pauses in numerous places to point out where Fitzgerald directly pulled from Conrad. I believe
Ah,
met at some point. Um,
probably. Yeah. That makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah, and and Fitzgerald had an unfortunate habit of making an ass of himself. I mean, we're talking about day drinking. We're talking
Oh,
we're talking
right,
about
right, right.
getting behind the wheel of a car, like
Uh,
hide your mailboxes,
yeah.
kind of drinking.
Oh boy.
The real deal. All right, so let's see. Let's get into it. In 1918. A young F. Scott Fitzgerald found himself stationed at Camp Sheridan near Montgomery, Alabama, with the 45th and 67th Infantry Regiments. He was not yet married, very young. Recovering from a broken heart after his rejection by Ginevra King, Fitzgerald began dating various young women in Montgomery. That might be slightly euphemistic, too, if you catch my drift. It was at a country club where he met the 17-year-old Southern belle, Zelda Sayre, granddaughter of a Confederate senator. Zelda, celebrated as one of Montgomery's most sought-after debutantes, caught Fitzgerald's eye, and a romance quickly blossomed.
Mhm.
So I'm going into the Sometimes Madness is Wisdom book. You spent a lot of time at country clubs, Brad?
No.
No. Why not?
I'm not even sure exactly what they are. And I don't have a membership. So yeah, I figured, some point maybe I'll be invited to one, but I don't think
Hmm.
that's gonna happen anytime soon.
I've been to one for a wedding, and I was at
Okay.
one other one in upstate New York
Okay.
for something. And it was unusual. There was like a highlight court in it.
Okay.
They showed me around. It was like, I'm never gonna belong here. I don't know that I ever want to. This is
Yeah.
gross.
It's
Yeah,
I was gonna say it's possible I've been to one and no one mentioned it was a country club, and so I wasn't aware.
you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't even know.
I've
Yeah.
been to the clubhouse of
What?
a golf course.
Right.
That's similar, I feel like.
One thing that people need to understand about Pulp and Slick,
Yeah.
Kevin and Brad, is that we are what you call Caddyshack Americans.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what we
Yeah,
are.
yeah, that's
So
fair.
you
Yeah.
have to embrace that
Mhm.
fact. Well,
Mhm.
and if you were born a Caddyshack American, despite what they tell you, you will never not be a Caddyshack American.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
true. It's true.
it's true. Okay. So this is from the book. In February of 1918, Scott took leave and sequestering himself in Princeton's Cottage Club. He was a Princeton man. Very big deal, obviously.
Mhm.
Polished his novel about a young man coming of age. When it was finished, he sent it to John Biggs' father's law office in Wilmington, Delaware. Biggs had briefly been his Princeton roommate and had offered the typing services of his father's secretary, Mrs. Bradford. Scott instructed her to make only one typed copy, which she did, sending it back to him along with his original longhand manuscript. The package never arrived. This was the first of two mishaps connected with his manuscript. The second occurred a year later when he sent the revised version to Scribner's via Tom Daniels. Upset but undaunted, Fitzgerald rewrote an entire second version from notes and memory, and
Oof.
once again sent it to Biggs with the same instructions. The new manuscript was much improved. So there you go. Just delete your hard drive after
Like
the first draft. Yeah. Mm.
forced him to do another draft. It probably helped, but I can imagine that moment. I'm working on a novel right now. I'm deep into it. I can imagine that moment. Like, wait, it doesn't exist now. Like that could be a rope moment, depending on your mental state when it happens. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it goes on and it talks about him submitting it to Scribner's, Max Perkins, and he's getting rejection. So I believe this is Perkins rejecting it, saying the story does not culminate in anything as it must to justify the reader's interest. He suggested changes for a revised submission. We hope we shall see it again, and we shall then reread it immediately. In 2 months, an improved version arrived on Perkins' desk. Scribner II liked it, but the older editors still voted no, and again it was returned to Fitzgerald, who, disappointed and temporarily dejected, put the manuscript away. So he's sent to Camp Sheridan. His Princeton classmate John Peel Bishop impatiently wrote from France, "When are you coming? God, I wish you'd hurry up. Aren't you almost a soldier now? We'll get a room in town the first night you are here and read Brooke and Keats all night." Princeton had given Fitzgerald an air of sophistication that made him appear very different from the Southern boys to whom Zelda was accustomed. He stood out from fellow soldiers, better dressed in their uniforms than ever before in their lives. Attired in his hand-tailored uniform, he represented a world Zelda sought to enter. He smelled like new goods, Zelda later wrote in her thinly veiled autobiographical novel, Save Me the Waltz. And being close to him with her face in the space between his ear and his stiff army collar was like being initiated into the subterranean reserves of a fine fabric store, exuding the delicacy of cambrics and linen and luxury bound in bales. With hundreds sold.
Sorry, did she write that? Was that her?
Did, yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, no, she was no slouch. She was just severely mentally ill. And it was called Save Me the Waltz because at 24, and we'll come to it, she devoted herself maniacally to becoming a prima ballerina, which is something you begin doing when you are 6 years old.
Right.
Or 4 years old.
Yeah,
and it drove her insane. And she was, I mean, I think it was Hemingway's theory. The idea was sort of like she was jealous of Fitzgerald's success, and kind of subconsciously or consciously sabotaged him, and enabled the drinking and encouraged the drinking, and would say she was lonely when he was writing. Yeah. Which is no good for a writer. A writer needs 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day with rare breaks to complete novels with much success, unless you're a lunatic like Bukowski. And even then, you need that time alone. And she couldn't have it. And they would have one child, but this is not a woman who threw herself into motherhood. The child Scotty was largely raised by other people. Boarding schools and governesses and whatever else it was. So Zelda was looking for something, and we're going to come to it. All right. Yeah, with hundreds of soldiers in town and not enough girls, Zelda recalled in her story Southern Girl how girls too tall or too prim for the taste of Jeffersonville, Montgomery, were dragged from their spinsterly pursuits to dance with the soldiers and make them feel less lonely through the summer nights. You could imagine how the popular ones fared. All right, little more here. Since he was assigned to headquarters company, First Lieutenant Fitzgerald was allowed to wear a custom-designed Brooks Brothers uniform, and instead of puttees, cream-colored boots extending up to just below his knees. With his chiseled nose, green eyes, and blonde hair parted down the middle, he made an impressive appearance despite his modest height of 5'8.5 inches. Oh, you got to get the half in there.
Hey, if you're under 6, you're under 6, you want those halves.
You're 5'11.5. We know that.
Yeah,
that's on the pod. Yeah, that's famous. And I'm 6'1", except if I'm at the doctor, then I'm 6.
Yeah.
Yeah. Handsome in a pretty way and projecting excitement and optimism, Fitzgerald seemed confident around women, though he was fully aware of his shortcomings. I don't have the 2 top things, great animal magnetism or money. I had the 2 second things, though, good looks and intelligence. So I always got the top girl. All right. So just painting a picture.
Just like me for real.
That's right. That's right. Baby, I'm not, I don't have animal magnetism. Yeah. And I don't have any money. Can you borrow me 20? Yeah. But I tell you what I got. Yeah. I got intelligence and I got good looks. I guess you could be ugly and have animal magnetism. I guess.
Yeah.
Probably
I think
Desaad.
I think I was gonna say
Yeah.
I think Desaad had that. Yeah, yeah, just
Yeah.
a little cretinous weirdo, but something about him. Yeah, yeah.
He had the magnetism of a pig.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, I mean,
exactly.
yeah. All right. Okay, great. So, despite his ongoing attempts to rekindle his relationship with Ginevra, Fitzgerald's affections shifted entirely towards Zelda. Just 3 days after Ginevra married a wealthy businessman, Fitzgerald proposed his love to Zelda in September of 1918. Their relationship intensified, leading to a period Fitzgerald later described as sexual recklessness,
Mm, mm.
which I that's the only kind, I guess. I I mean, I guess you could do it through a sheet and
Mm, mm.
wear a
Yeah, well,
rubber and what
yeah,
yeah.
right.
You're always playing with fire.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. As soon as the pants come down, man,
Well,
it's
gosh,
yeah,
even if you're married, it's a little
yeah.
reckless, you know?
But and see, and I feel like, and we're a couple of good Midwestern cradle Catholic boys, just
Mhm.
like Fitzgerald, and he was hung up on sex for sure.
Sure, of
Hmm.
course. Yeah.
Hmm. I mean, there you go. Unlike our friend, the Marquis de Sade, who
Yeah,
was
no
not at all
hangups.
hung up.
This is
Yeah.
that's what happens when you have no hangups.
Mm,
So
right.
maybe you
Yeah.
should have a
Yeah.
couple.
There could be, you could find a middle ground.
You don't have to be a head
Yeah.
case about it, but
Sure.
maybe,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we said on that episode, man, 120 days of Sodom. That's too many days.
Too many days.
Way too many days of Sodom. It's almost a third of a year. I mean, you don't even take weekends.
Right.
They didn't even take weekends
No,
off
no.
Sodom. You think it like for good behavior or for bad behavior, you get the
Right, right.
weekends off anyway,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is before the Sodom unionized
Right.
and won
Yeah.
us won the Sodomites their rights.
Yeah, we're finally treated like humans.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a 40-hour sodomy week.
It's still a lot, but it's at least bearable.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah. Paid sodomy time off.
Yeah, you got time for hobbies and you can go on
Sure.
vacation once a year.
Right.
Yeah.
You could do other things. Yeah. All right. By December of 1918, the couple had consummated their relationship, but not their marriage. Tisk, tisk, tisk.
Mm,
And of course, she's a Protestant. He's a Catholic.
mhm,
Ooh.
mhm.
Fitzgerald's time in Montgomery was briefly interrupted when he was transferred to Camp Mills on Long Island. However, with the end of World War I, he quickly returned to Alabama to pursue Zelda. Despite initially not intending to marry her, the couple gradually saw themselves as informally engaged, though Zelda refused to marry Fitzgerald until he could prove financially stable. Very
Mhm.
important.
Yeah.
She's not going to live in a trailer,
Right.
or whatever they would do, whatever the equivalent. She's not going to live in a boarding house.
Yeah.
She's from a good family.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Fitzgerald was too. He was from a fair bit of money, not wealthy, but upper middle class,
But
enough to go to Princeton.
yeah, if he wouldn't have gotten sort of bit by the writing bug, he probably could have found something else that was
Sure.
reasonably well paid, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, yeah. There was business in his family, and yeah, he would have been fine. But yeah,
Mhm.
he decided to write and to drink.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
always in that order.
yeah.
Hmm. All right. In February of 1919, Fitzgerald was discharged from the Army and moved to New York City, where he struggled to find a job in journalism, turning to writing advertising copy to make ends meet. Is this a familiar story?
Yeah.
Anybody else a writer out there? Have you familiar? Is this a nothing changes moment 100
Yeah.
years ago?
Yeah.
I moved to New York, tried my hand as a journalism. Now I'm writing ad copy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm writing SEO blog posts now.
Right. Right.
That's what
Right.
I do now. Like, okay, all right.
Oh.
He continued his courtship of Zelda, sending her his mother's ring in March of 1919, solidifying their engagement. However, both Fitzgerald's friends and Zelda's family had reservations about the match, citing Zelda's unsuitability and Fitzgerald's precarious finances and drinking habits. They knew, people knew it was a case of this is not a good match. You horny little
Yeah.
mixes, you
Yeah.
horny, little hot little things. You are playing with fire. People knew. People knew. Okay. And
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
I'm making the case, and I'm not trying to be hostile to either of them. Like I love F. Scott Fitzgerald. I think
Hmm.
Zelda is fascinating.
Hmm.
They weren't right, they were not right for each other. And when I say it was one of the most destructive marriages on record, one, it's because it's, recorded exhaustively because
Yeah.
he's obviously one of the most famous people to ever live, but also a man of letters. So there's a strong record of all of this. And of course, he was in the milieu of all the famous writers at the time. He met everybody, everybody knew him.
Hmm.
And it would have a story about him. And, but when I mean destructive, it's like, man, we might have had two more Gatsby's, three more.
Right.
Can you
Right.
imagine?
Oh, he
Like,
was as for a writer, he was a young man when he died.
yes. And well,
Yeah.
and even if he had died at the same age, if those 10 wasted years, those 15 wasted years had not been spent writing junk short stories and flirting with Hollywood, who
Right.
knows what could have happened? This is obviously speculation.
Hmm.
Who knows? He may
Yeah.
have, if he hadn't married her, he might have died in a car accident. You
He
don't
might have
know
married
anything.
some crazier,
He might have married a woman from Minnesota.
It all worked out right. It
Yeah,
all worked out fine,
yeah, a
right?
good
Yeah.
stable, blonde from Minnesota. He
Mhm.
death by hot dish
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
lutefisk. He might have married a Lutheran. Can you imagine? We'd be telling a totally different tale. All right. Determined to succeed in literature, Fitzgerald worked at the Baron Collier Advertising Agency while living in a modest room in Manhattan's West Side. Despite creating a catchy slogan for an Iowa laundry, he remained in relative poverty. His literary efforts initially met with little success, with only one story, Babes in the Woods, being published for a meager sum. Disheartened by his failed career in New York and Zelda's broken engagement, he returned to St. Paul, Minnesota in July of 1919. Living as a social recluse at his parents' home, he made a final attempt to become a successful novelist. Never give up. He
Hmm.
revised his earlier manuscript, The Romantic Egoist, into This Side of Paradise, an autobiographical account of his Princeton years and romantic entanglements. Going back into the book, let's see here. Da, da, da. Right, you ever been to the Princeton campus? I've never been to the
I've
Princeton
never been
campus.
there. No, no.
I'd like to see it. It's interesting to see these famous places for the first time. MIT is very weird. You ever been to the
Hmm.
MIT
I have
campus?
been to MIT campus. Yeah.
Very,
Yeah.
very unusual. The architecture
Hmm.
is very strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
definitely feels like you're in a big laboratory. Not in a laboratory like with there's like glass beakers everywhere. It feels very yeah, it feels like you're part of a project walking on that campus somehow. Yeah. That was the
Indeed.
impression I had. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. It's an
Mhm.
interesting way to put it. All right. So I got a little bit about this period here. A couple of pages from the Sometimes Madness is Wisdom. While Fitzgerald ground out slogans and submitted stories to magazines, Zelda continued collecting beaux. In addition to dating Sellers, she was crowned prom queen at 3 different campuses that season: the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, the
Mhm.
University of Georgia, and Sewanee. You ever been to Sewanee?
Nope, no. It's in
Sewanee
Georgia
has a
somewhere, right?
No, it's in Tennessee.
Oh,
Sewanee
okay.
is, they call it the University of the South. It is an incredible campus. It's an
Hmm.
Episcopalian campus. They sent their architects over, I think, 100 years now, maybe ish, to Oxford and Cambridge and basically said, take notes. We want that.
Wow,
And
cool.
it's incredible. They have a fantastic writers' conference.
Yeah.
Tennessee Williams left, if not all of his estate, a lot of his estate to them. So they include playwrights at that conference. And if
Cool.
anybody's a writer and you've never applied to go to Sewanee, it's really worth it. It's an incredible week or two. And fireflies and you're in the South and it's just a
Mhm.
whole vibe, dude. But yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know how does somebody I'll never be a prom queen or king at any Southern
Uni-
campus.
No, no, those days have passed us by, Kevin.
We
Yeah.
listen,
Yeah.
and we're overcompensating now, man. It really, I got to talk to somebody. But really,
Yeah.
I don't even know how that happens. What does that even
Don't you have to
mean?
be
I
a
mean,
student at
yeah,
you don't have to be a student at them? I don't, yeah.
right. You're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I
I
don't
don't
get it.
get it. I mean, very strange. Maybe it's just you show up to the affair,
Yeah.
and it was probably part of this whirlwind social calendar that she was
Right.
on. She's a
Right.
debutante, and Yeah, different world, dude. Long gone.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Do they
Mm.
even do prom at colleges anymore?
Oh God.
I've been to three colleges and I don't think I've heard the word prom used once at any of them. So,
It just
much.
it. Listen, dude. There's so many comments I could make about that right now, and I'm just gonna let that one sit.
Okay.
It's like the shark in Jaws. You don't. I'm just not gonna show it to you.
Okay.
We're going to woke prom the universe. I had to say, okay, you understand what I mean. Yeah, problematic.
Hmm.
Um, with each week, she became less certain about her feelings towards Scott and told her Sewanee date, John Dearborn, that while she was no longer passionate about Fitzgerald, she felt it her mission to help him become a great writer.
Ah.
Scott sensed a new coolness, but attributed it solely to his poverty. He had met her when she was 17, possessed her young heart all through her first season, and then lost her slowly, tragically, uselessly because he had no money and could make no money. He would never forget Zelda's reluctance to marry him while poor because it rekindled painful memories of Ginevra King and reinforced his love-hate feelings about the rich. The young man with the jingle of money in his pocket who married the girl a year later would always cherish an abiding distrust and animosity toward the leisure class, not the conviction of a revolutionist, but the smoldering hatred of a peasant. In the years since, I have never been able to stop wondering once where my friend's money came from, nor to stop thinking that at one time a sort of droit de seigneur might have been exercised to give one of them my girl. From this juncture, he eyed the rich with suspicion, considering them a separate species. Hemingway later, and again, this is all of what's lost when Hollywood represents this shit. They don't touch on this at all, in my opinion. In any of the movies, it's Gatsby is a bitter novel. There's a
Hmm.
lot of meanness in there. There's a lot of peasant resentment in there, and he's not wrong either. Again,
Right.
it's perfectly reasonable to be a young, intelligent person in a world where money provides every advantage practically, and to have the intelligence to know that they don't deserve it and yet they have it. It creates a lot of resentment and bitterness. I've I've read.
Supposedly, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
supposedly.
feel
And
like
then
I knew
even when
somebody
you
like that once.
yeah, really, exactly. And then when you get that money, maybe you get that money, then everything gets all topsy-turvy because
Yeah.
it's very, very, very complicated. And you don't talk about money, do you? It's
No.
gauche, it's
Yeah.
déclassé. We don't talk about money, do we?
Hmm.
We don't talk about where we got it. We don't talk about how much we have. We don't talk about how it's what it's doing because
Yeah.
that would be creates problems, right?
Well, and it also it would highlight the fact that there are actually classes in America and we're not supposed to
Can't
have
have it.
those.
We
Yeah.
can't have it. We got to
Yeah.
hide it. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Hemingway later mocked these feelings in the snows of Kilimanjaro, writing, he remembered poor Scott Fitzgerald and his romantic awe of the rich and how he had started a story once that began, the very rich are different from you and me, and how someone had said to Scott, yes, they have more money. But that was not humorous to Scott. He thought they were a special glamorous race, and when he found out they weren't, it wrecked him as much as any other thing that wrecked him.
Hmm.
All right. Uh yeah, this is interesting. A little more here. Fitzgerald had no illusions about winning Zelda without a substantial income, and though she sent encouraging letters, we're swimming all the time, and every dive makes me think of how we're always going. I wish I had done everything on earth with you all my life. You are the only man on earth who has ever known and loved all of me. She tempered her encouragement with generous descriptions of her dates at parties and proms.
Oh my God.
Oh, dude, it gets worse. This dynamic now take that dynamic all the way to the extreme, and that's where we're going. You can imagine
Right,
where it's going.
right,
Not
right.
a good place. Hoping his presence might persuade her to marry, Scott made 3 train trips to Montgomery between April and June of 1919. Nevertheless, the courtship remained at a standstill. In June of 1919, Zelda ended what had always been a trial engagement. She coldly explained that his inability to support her would sour their marriage and inevitably leave them frustrated and miserable. Though the rejection hurt and angered him, he put her parting words to quick use, fusing them into Rosalind's rejection of Amory in This Side of Paradise. All right, let's read this. Rosalind. Oh, and gonna ask Brad to read from some of the novels and the short stories as we go, so it's not just my voice yapping the whole time. And Brad's our resident prose stylist.
Yeah.
Although I'm pretty good with dialogue. I'm a playwright. All right. Rosalind, I can't, Amory. I can't be shut away from the trees and flowers, cooped up in a little flat, waiting for you. You'd hate me in a narrow atmosphere. I'd make you hate me. Again, she is blinded by sudden, uncontrolled tears. Rosalind, oh, darling, go. Don't make it harder. I can't stand it. His face drawn, his voice strained. Do you know what you're saying? Do you mean forever? There's a difference somehow in the quality of their suffering. You see how juvenile it is, right? Can't you see? I'm afraid I can't if you love me. This is Amory. You're afraid of taking 2 years knocks with me. Rosalind, I wouldn't be the Rosalind you love. Amory, a little hysterically. Let me try that. I can't give you up. I can't. That's all. I've got to have you. Rosalind, a hard note in her voice. You're being a baby now. Amory, wildly. I don't care. You're spoiling our lives. Rosalind, I'm doing the wise thing, the only thing. All right. So there
Adam
you go.
Driver punching the wall in that. What's that movie?
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah, exactly. This second rejection was almost unbearable. Somehow he had to quickly prove himself, so he visited Max Perkins at Scribner's to discuss his novel. Perkins suggested he rewrite it in the third person, and on the 4th of July, 1919, Fitz quit his collier's job and prepared to leave New York for St. Paul. On his last bittersweet days in Manhattan, he wandered around 127th Street, envious of those who appeared more successful than he, and in the cheapest seats he could buy, lost himself for a few hours on Broadway. I was a failure, mediocre at advertising work and unable to get started as a writer. Hating the city, I got roaring, weeping drunk on my last penny and went home. Back at his parents' house in St. Paul at 599 Summit Avenue, he stopped drinking and started revising The Egoists, the Romantic Egoists, and he retitled it This Side of Paradise after Robert Brooks' poem T.R. Tahiti. The last lines of the poem, well, this side of paradise, there's little comfort in the wise, would appear on his title page, suggesting that mature wisdom provided no more satisfaction than youthful enthusiasm. And it's set at Princeton and so forth. Okay, great. Some fun stuff in there. I've got more from this book that I want to read. Let's see. Here we go. So she's still feeling reserved about marrying him. And
man, he should have. God, if he a big what if is like, what if he would have just been like, well, I guess she's not marrying me.
So many, but she was the prom queen at Georgia, Alabama, and Sewanee.
Right.
There's probably literally nobody else quite like her.
Sure. Yeah.
And also, like, there's that weird allure of, I mean, she was negging the shit out of him.
Right.
So now it's, she knew what she was doing.
If
now
you could
it's
only
like,
make a little more money, you could be like Chad, this gentleman I went on a lovely date with last evening. Yeah,
he had the most extraordinary hog.
Right,
thick as my wrist. Oh, I've said too much.
Was that too much, darling? I don't mean to hurt your feelings.
That would be if we were doing this now,
right? Just Zelda sending him a dick pic of her date. Mm-hmm. Is this too big, do you think?
The woke prom queen of Arizona State. Oh man, what's an Episcopalian? I can just hear it now. At Scribner's, opinions of Fitzgerald's novel continued to be split between young and old editors. The elder Charles Scribner still considered it frivolous, but Maxwell Perkins recognized that Fitzgerald's distinctive explorations of flappers' attitudes was unlike anything published before. He pushed for approval. On September 16th, 1919, news of Scribner's acceptance arrived in St. Paul via special delivery from Perkins.
Hell yeah.
All right. Hell yeah, dude. Our boy's getting a break. He's getting his break. I am very glad personally to be able to write you that we are all for publishing your book, This Side of Paradise. The book is so different that it is hard to prophesy how it will sell, but we are all for taking a chance and supporting it with vigor. Fitzgerald was ecstatic. He stopped cars on the road and people in the street to share his good news, bought a new suit and paid past due bills. He wired Zelda. He was on his way to Montgomery and arrived with the manuscript, a bottle of Sazerac, her favorite gin, and an unwavering conviction that the Scribner's contract would change Zelda's mind. What a wonderful story. How romantic, right?
It is. Yeah,
it is.
It is. But knowing what we know now, a little more spite and a little less self-deprecation would have gone a long way. If that letter would have been like, yeah, so Zelda, turns out that I'm getting my book published with Scribner. So hope everything's going well with you.
Sure. Absolutely. Very over the top, maudlin and kind of cloying and desperate, thirsty, too thirsty. Not like all the PUA guys would be like, yo, bro, what are you doing? Like you might get the girl, but like the girl's getting you here. This is a mess. Like you're setting yourself up for all kinds of, you're not self-contained. You're not standing on your own feet. He was a romantic. A romantic. Yeah. And it would finally, I think, destroy him. It took several days and all his persuasive power. And see, even that, you're just like, bro, she's just not that into you. Just go. Yeah. To get her tentative agreement to marry. Still, she insisted on waiting until the novel actually was in bookstores. In a letter written to Scott following his departure for New York, she confessed her past misgivings. I'm very proud of you. I hate to say this, but I don't think I had much confidence in you at first. It's so nice to know that you really can do things, anything. And I love to feel that maybe I can help just a little. Sheesh. Indeed, Fitzgerald knew he had in Zelda an unending source of story material. Wow. That is true. To avoid the Minnesota winter, why would anyone want to do that? He would, man. I had a guy come over yesterday, and like a locksmith come over yesterday and do some of the locks in our house. We have this sort of old house. Did a fabulous job, and he was clearly proud of his trade. And he was showing me what he was doing, and he just went boom. And it was not an easy job. The doors are not level, and da da da. And he was like. He talked about how he was from central Kansas. And then he was like, but I moved to Minnesota. There's never enough snow in Kansas. I love the snow. I love winter. It's my favorite season. I'm just going, well, you're very, okay. Then you're in the right place, my friend.
Yeah, he found home then. Yeah.
He's just, very happy guy. He was a very nice guy.
That's cool.
All right. Yeah. Tradesmen rock. Really. Like I watched them do that and I can't, what are you doing? Oh my God. All right. So he headed for New Orleans in January of 1920, took a room in a boarding house, and he was reading the galley proofs. And he made 2 trips from Louisiana to Montgomery, and on the second resumed his sexual relationship with Zelda. They'd slept together early in the courtship, but subsequently Zelda had held back. Fitzgerald referred to this ploy in story notes. After yielding, she holds Philippe at bay like Zelda and me in the summer of 1919.
Oh, that's a good trick on her part too. Just the once. Lay it out there the one time.
Sure. Yeah. Just a little bit of Fitz. Just a little. Yeah. Just enough. Just a taste. Yeah. First one's free.
Right. Oh boy.
So now Scott insists they tell Zelda's parents of their engagement. So mom and dad don't know. And the Sayers were hoping that she would change her mind. They did not place an announcement in the local paper, nor did they tell anyone of the impending wedding. Though her parents never spoke out directly against him, all her sisters did. And until the last moment, Zelda wavered. But the mass power of the family's disapproval was, in the end, overpowered by Zelda's determination to escape Alabama. We're going to get out of here. I'm young and I'm young, dumb, full of cum. I'm ready to go. I mean, come on, man. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Most of Fitzgerald's friends also opposed the marriage because of Zelda's insistence on financial security. He dismissed their warnings. And so he's writing around and they're getting ready. And so let's see. Though the impending publication had moved Zelda closer to marriage, no actual wedding date was set until Harold Ober sold the story head and shoulders to the Saturday Evening Post for $400, plus movie rights at $2,500. Now, this is, I think we're approaching like that's an annual salary.
It's got to be, because it's got to be like
almost $3,000.
Yeah.
My understanding is like 30,000 was like 10x. And so that would put it at, it'd probably be like $40,000 or $50,000 here that he's just made for a story.
Right. It's got a book coming out. Yeah.
What's the going rate for a short story these days, Brad?
I think you pay them.
No. I think you pay them for the privilege.
Not quite. Zero. If they pay you nothing, you got a good deal. Usually you have to pay.
What is like the New Yorker
submission fee? What's that?
What does the New Yorker pay? Do you think?
I'm not sure.
Not $50,000.
No. Yeah. No. It would for the New Yorker, which is the best place a short story could get placed. It's probably thousands, like sub 10.
Not bad
for sure. But
yeah,
I'd be surprised if it's 5.
I mean, what you really get is tenure at a university. That's what you get. Then you get to go teach creative writing somewhere because you are fancy.
Yeah, it floats you up the hierarchy. Yeah,
that's what it does. Yeah, different. Yeah, we almost more medieval now. Strange. Yeah, interesting. You need to seek patronage from the state, or from a private, from a private equity company that has a university attached. Okay.
But great. Most fiction short stories pay 0, and a lot of journals now require you to pay a submission fee that's like $15 or something like that.
Fun. Yeah, I got to keep the rabble out. All right. So now he has a market. He has Saturday Evening Post, and this was a huge breakthrough. And the sale also initiated what would become Scott's continuing dilemma and pursues authors to this day, the desire to be a serious writer, yet earn big money. I want to write my novel, but I could also go write on this procedural show in Hollywood. I could go write about vampires in Hollywood right now. I'm going to make the Vampire Sopranos, and then you just end up making just Drek
doggerel,
streaming canceled after 2 seasons, and like 5 people talk about it on Twitter. But you're making money.
Yeah.
I'm a showrunner
because you're the backwash of some money laundering operation, right? So yeah, you get some money. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You're helping Netflix, take a tax break somehow or use some IP that's going to expire or something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So his fees escalated to $2,500 a story, having the purchasing power of $25,000 in today's dollars. And this was in 2001. So now that would probably be 30, 40. Yeah, almost twice that. Yeah. The lucrative movie sales prompted Fitz to discuss this new market with Ober. I was talking to Mrs. Flandreau last night, and her saying that she'd gotten offers for movie rights to her Post story reminded me of something I wanted to ask you. Is there money in writing movies? Do you sell scenarios? Ober's affirmative response.
I can hear the devil coming in the window as he's asking this question. Wait, is there money in writing movies?
Yeah, and to the sound of Pink Floyd's Money, right?
Right.
Yeah. To celebrate his first big success, Fitzgerald visited a Fifth Avenue jewelry store and purchased an extravagant platinum and diamond wristwatch for Zelda.
Oh,
that's our guy.
Man.
Not I'm going to the bank and this is going to compound. This money's going to make me money. Nope, I'm buying a diamond wristwatch.
I'm kind of making fun of him a little bit, but I genuinely sympathize and empathize with all of this at the same time. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. I really wonder how many people in crypto have made it and then regretted it. I think maybe there are not a few people buried in Miami who it did not work out.
Yeah.
They made their $4 million and promptly died. with ODs,
Yeah.
other violence, strange. Yeah, it's a mess. Anyway,
Windfalls are tricky. There's like a legend where I grew up. There's someone who the family won the lottery, and it's like a story you would tell children at this point. It's just the whole thing. They were fine before. They're a middle class family doing fine, and then 5 years, flash forward 5 years, it's divorces and lawsuits and car wrecks and just a friggin' nightmare. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there you are. All right. So he wanted to be at Princeton holding court when the book came out, so he left for Cottage to attend a prom and waited there for the March 26th publication date. And he's a baby. He's a kid. That day, This Side of Paradise appeared in Scribner's bookstore on Fifth Avenue. Its window advertised Fitzgerald as the youngest writer for whom Scribner's has ever published a novel.
Hey.
It was an overnight bestseller. Of the 5,000 copies in the first printing, 3,000 sold in 3 days.
Hey.
Fresh and trendy, the glib book was also formless and superficial, showing little of the power Fitzgerald would achieve in later works. But it was the novel that made him famous and spokesman for the jazz age. And I think in part one, we covered some of this. But I want to do it. News of Fitzgerald's literary success and the arrival of the exquisite watch did the trick. The formal announcement of their engagement appeared on March 28th in the Montgomery Advertiser. It read simply, Judge and Mrs. A.D. Sayre announced the engagement of their daughter Zelda to Francis Scott Fitzgerald of New York, the marriage to take place at an early date. Not of St. Paul, of New York.
Of New York, of course. Yeah.
A few days later, the paper elaborated, Mrs. M.W. Brinson, Marjorie Sayre Brinson, accompanied by her sister, Ms. Zelda Sayre, have gone to New York City, and there will be guests of Mrs. J.M. Palmer, formerly Miss Clotilda Sayre. Still, there was no mention of
Sayre. All right.
Clotilda. That's a name you don't hear much anymore. Adolf and Clotilda.
Not popular names. Yeah.
No, not popular names. No. Still, there was no mention of the date or location of the wedding. The announcement shocked Montgomeryans, including two of Zelda's boyfriends who expected to marry her themselves and refused to believe the story. She's marrying a Catholic? This is interesting. I'm going to read to the end of this chapter. Convinced that Scott would not take proper care of his daughter, Judge Sayre remained opposed to the union. Zelda encouraged Fitzgerald to write her father and reassure him, Darling, Mama knows that we are going to be married someday, but she keeps leaving stories of young authors turned out on a dark and stormy night on my pillow. I wonder if you hadn't better write to my daddy just before I leave. I wish I were detached, sorta without relatives. I'm not exactly scared of them, but they would be so unpleasant about what we're going to do. Fitzgerald went ahead with the wedding plans and wired simply, I have taken rooms at the Biltmore and will expect you Friday or Saturday. Wire me exactly when. Okay, now he's flexing. Now he's like, okay. He's got his sea legs now.
Yeah.
Baby, I'm a best-selling novelist.
I get a little respect here.
I'm writing you tweets now.
Right.
I'm not, you could take it or
Do you know
leave
how
it,
much I get paid per word? Do you have any idea?
For real. He should have had this energy the entire time.
Right.
I'm a big fake it till you make it guy. I don't know if you can tell. If you listened to the pod from day one, you might have picked that up. On departure day, her sister Marjorie accompanied Zelda to Montgomery's Victorian train station, where they were met by a crowd of well-wishers. Zelda's friends, carrying bouquets for her, went to the station to see her off, recalled Rosalind. Several years ago, I was introduced to a Montgomery woman and mentioned as Zelda's sister. I did not know Zelda personally, she said, but I happened to see her in the station the morning she was leaving for her marriage, and I've never forgotten how beautiful she was. Zelda arrived in Manhattan, immaculate and rested even after the long journey. My husband and I met Zelda and my eldest sister at the train when they arrived, said Rosalind, and found Zelda appropriately dressed in the gray-blue spring suit, which the later wore to the ceremony at St. Patrick's, enhanced by a corsage Scott had sent her for the occasion. She was as beautiful then as I had ever seen her and quite fit for Fifth Avenue. Fitzgerald and his best man, Ludlow Fowler, who were at the train station and escorted the two sisters to the Biltmore. On the eve of the ceremony, there were stars in their eyes and the excitement of great expectations. Scott welcomed Zelda's dependency, telling one reporter, I think just being in love, doing it well, is work enough for a woman. If she keeps her house the way it should be kept and makes herself look pretty when her husband comes home in the evening and loves him and helps him with his work and encourages him, oh, I think that's the sort of work that will save her. Whew. Zelda agreed.
I'm getting a little worked up here, actually, listening to that description.
It was not until later that she would develop a very different idea of what women's work should be, one that would take a heavy toll on their marriage. All right. And so the ceremony took place at noon on Easter Sunday, April 3rd, in the rectory of St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue. Fitzgerald's cousin, Father William B. Martin, officiated. All right, so they have a Catholic marriage, and then Rosalind would say, there was no luncheon after the wedding because it appeared to us that it was not wanted. Scott did not communicate with us until the day before the wedding when he phoned to say that it would take place at St. Patrick's the next morning, which made us feel that plans had been made and as he and Zelda wanted them, or he would have come to discuss them with us. Though Rosalind and Newman were not personally offended by the lack of amenities, Clotilda and her husband were. You can't offend. Clotildas are easily offended.
Right. Yeah, I think that's...
You give somebody that name, they're going to be touchy. And the relationship between them and the Fitzgerald was never fully repaired. And this is going to be a recurring theme. Fitzgerald could win friends, but he could lose them too. And some people would stick with him. Other people would be like, nah, fuck this. I don't need this. This guy's a drunk and there's no amount of fun. I mean, there would be a point where they ensconced themselves in this kind of mansion in Delaware. We'll come to it. People would describe going for their weekends as like going to war. No food would be served. I mean, it was just wet, drunk weekends that would last from Friday until Sunday.
Yeah,
and then letters of apology.
Right.
I was such a bore. I apologize for I don't even know what did I do, but I'm definitely sorry for whatever I don't remember doing. That kind of thing. Yeah. Let's describe a little more of this. This book is so well written. Tilda and her husband were invited, arriving at the hour they were told was appointed, only to find the wedding over.
Oh my God.
Scott had become fidgety with waiting for the ceremony to begin, and despite Zelda's and my protesting, had told the priest to go on with it. Are we getting a picture of this? Yeah. So we met the Palmers on the sidewalk, chatted for a few minutes. Then Scott and Zelda walked away to wherever they were going. They may have lunched at the Fowlers. Scott had done all the planning without consulting me or telling me anything about it. And under those circumstances, I could not offer entertainment. They obviously did not want it after the wedding. Marjorie and the Palmers and Newman and I lunched together. Then Marjorie went home with Tilda for a visit. The honeymoon commenced immediately in room 2109 of the Biltmore on 43rd Street and Vanderbilt Avenue. Their first wedding present, a chocolate set with a delicate Tiffany urn, remained on the dressing table beside a fading Easter lily their entire 2-week-long stay. Zelda considered it the most romantic day of her life.
Aw.
Do you remember, she wrote Scott, our first meal in the Biltmore when you said, and now there'll never be just 2 of us again. From now on, we'll be 3, you, me, and us. And it was sort of sad somehow. And then it was the saddest thing in the world, but we were safer and closer than ever. All right. So his Princeton classmates show up at the Biltmore and he's a star.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
All right.
Okay. So yes. And This Side of Paradise is the thing that does it for him. I believe we read some of this on part 1.
We did.
So
Yep.
we don't have to read more of it, but it sold 40,000 copies in the first year. And household name, and we're going to publish magazine stories now. Basically, you write a story, somebody's going to publish it. You're going to make, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000 a story. Just dash a story off on a weekend and, edit it. Ooh, boy. Whoa, doggy. Here we go. Good times. So let's see here. I've got something from LitHub behind the myth of Scott and Zelda's epic romance. You might want to just go and find this. It's very interesting. This is from Eleanor Lanahan on her grandparents' love letters. So I'm just gonna read a little bit. Well, this is sort of I might come back to this. I'm gonna come back to that. All right, let's move forward. That's a good article if you want to read it. This is,
Okay.
one of their relatives. I'm just thinking about time, and this
Mhm.
sort of puts us out of time. Well, maybe I'm going to read a couple paragraphs of this. Uh, just to go back. The fairy tale began when Scott and Zelda met in 1918 at a country club dance in Montgomery, Alabama. Lieutenant F. Scott Fitzgerald was among the many soldiers stationed at nearby Fort Sheridan awaiting orders to fight overseas. Zelda, gifted with beauty, grace, high spirits, and expert skills of flirtation, which I think we've discovered,
Mhm.
was one of the most popular belles in the region. Her earliest letters to Scott are distinctly girlish. She sounds awash, a goggle in love. Young women of the South, barely freed of their Victorian chaperones, still cultivated an utter femininity, a pink helplessness, as Zelda calls it. She also refers merrily to her desire for merged identities, for Scott to define her existence. In taking a man's name, a woman assumed his whole identity, including his career and his social standing, an abject dependency that today would make both sexes wary. Zelda's declarations of loneliness, of her nothingness without him, might be alarming to the modern reader, but they are reflections of the time. The 19th Amendment guaranteeing women the right to vote was not even ratified until August 1920. Uh, so, yes, the Fitzgerald arrived in New York for the kickoff of the Roaring Twenties. And one thing about Scott Fitzgerald, the 20s were his time.
Mhm.
Boogie Nights, where it turns from the 70s to the 80s with that
Yeah.
epic and midpoint gunshot, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Fitzgerald, like when 1930 kicks off
Yeah.
and the Depression kicks off,
Yeah.
it is so over. He
Right.
falls. He's in alcoholism, and we're just kicking off the 20s here now. So we're going to
Right.
go over
Right.
these 10 years exhaustively over the next 3 hours.
Mm.
But by the time 1930 hits, like she's losing her mind, he's an alcoholic. Like they very much were the zeitgeist of the times. And of course, in the Depression, his work would be seen as totally out of touch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. On a certain reading, it kind of was. I mean, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have enough distance from it now where, like, yeah, the economy, it seems like the economy is permanently bad now, I guess. Like, I
Right.
don't know. It's like every 5 to 7 years, it's bad. So it's like sort of always bad, but not. It's very confusing.
Yeah.
Nobody's getting $40,000 for a short story. I'll
No.
tell you that much.
No. No.
But yeah, so the Fitzgerald arrived in New York for the kickoff of the Roaring Twenties. In a lot of ways, you could say he kicked the ball. Like
Mm.
with this novel, he was like, "Here we are. This is our
Mhm.
generation."
Mhm.
In the boom years, it seemed the entire city was having one big party. That's how he defined the 20s too. He said it was the most expensive orgy ever. And by
Yeah.
expensive, I think he meant a lot more than just money.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The ticker tape had barely settled along the Fifth Avenue parade route from welcoming the troops home from World War I when Scott's first novel, This Side of Paradise, astonished his publishers and sold out of its first printing. A week after publication, they were married. The 23-year-old Scott, 23 years old, an overnight celebrity, told the press that his greatest ambitions were to write the best novel that ever was and to stay in love with his wife forever. Wife guy.
Mm. Mhm.
With his instinctive media savvy, the newlyweds set about giving America a fresh image of itself as youthful, fun-loving, free-spending, hardworking, and innovative. They weren't too sophisticated to plunge in the plaza fountain or to spin to their heart's content in the hotel doors. Scott described the excitement of those early days in the East. New York had all the iridescence of the beginning of the world. That's another thing that gets a lot, hopefully doesn't get lost in this episode. Great fucking writer.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
say that sentence again. New York had all the iridescence of the beginning of the world. It's just a great sentence.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and he recalled an important and too often overlooked ingredient to this fairy tale, writing all night and all night again. All right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, here we are. Uh, can we get much higher?
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh, dude, and 23 years old, it's like you don't know. I mean, it's a great time. That's a great time. Uh, it's also there's just so little that there's so many things you don't know. And your energy's all like I don't know. For most 23-year-olds anyway, it's like when your energy is its most frenetic, you still have like all the physical energy of like a teenager, but like yeah, that's a crazy time and to suddenly be a celebrity and yeah, insane.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah.
I mean, what were you doing when you were 23?
I mean, I was drinking, maybe not quite as much as F. Scott Fitzgerald, but I was putting a few pops back. 23. Oh, I moved cross country midway through my 20 that year, and I just tied one on and didn't untie it for another 3 or 4 years.
It's very easy to start when you're 23 and not stop until you're 33 or
Yeah.
43 too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for real. All right.
Hmm.
So he and Zelda embraced their newfound celebrity status in NYC. They lived lavishly at the Biltmore Hotel, where their wild behavior became the talk of the town. They embodied the jazz age exuberance from handstands in the lobby to sliding down banisters. And they got enough money that it doesn't matter. And the staff is
Mhm.
going to talk and laugh and, okay, we're having fun.
Mhm.
But they eventually have too much fun. Their antics would get them evicted, and they
Mhm.
moved to the Commodore Hotel,
Mhm.
where they continued their playful escapades. And I've got something from the Washington Post here. This is a review of a book by Paul Alexander. The book is The Love Letters, more about the letters. Let me see if I can find a good para here. Yeah. The 1920 novel, This Side of Paradise, bestseller. A week later, they're married. Over the coming years, they exchanged few letters because they were almost always together.
Sure. Yeah.
In an often turbulent lifestyle that included constant drinking, occasional infidelity, and intermittent quarreling, he would eventually publish The Beautiful and the Damned. They had a daughter, Scotty, and living, and this is getting ahead of things, we'll run up to this, and living on the French Riviera, they became part of a smart set surrounding Sarah and Gerald Murphy that included Picasso, Dorothy Parker, and Ernest Hemingway. So
Hmm.
that's what we're coming up to, coming attractions. All right. His fame brought him into contact with notable figures of the era, and of course, he's in New York, so everybody wants to meet him.
Right.
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 And so he's meeting Ring Lardner. This is a sports columnist, journalist Rebecca West, critics George Jean Nathan, and H.L. Mencken.
Hmm.
And despite his commercial success, he had a profound sense of unhappiness. And I believe it was at this period in New York where he was being driven around in a taxi. Thank goodness, being
Yeah.
driven around in a taxi. And I think he wept at one point because he realized he would uh, never be as happy as he was then.
Hmm.
He
Hmm. Hmm.
he had an acute sense that
This is
he
the
was
best it
peaking
gets.
early. Yeah,
Yeah.
it gets no better than this. Yeah.
Mm.
All right. So I've got, and now I'm going to go into the Scott Fitzgerald bio from Jeffrey Meyers. And let's see here. Ah, yes. Okay. In February of 1921, Zelda discovered she was pregnant, and they decided to take their first trip to Europe while she could still travel. Now, the timeline of their coming and going to Europe, I'm not going to get it perfect, but they would bop back and forth. And
Mm.
they were of that generation that would go to Paris because it was dirt cheap. You could go
Right.
and like he wasn't making, $2 million a year, but he may as well have been. The dollar would just smash over in Europe. So all these writers just said, and of course it's Paris. Why wouldn't you? Paris in the 20s?
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
war's
Yeah.
over. It's
Yeah.
Paris.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Go. Yeah.
yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Um, they sailed on the Aquitania and docked in Southampton in May of 1921. While staying at the Hotel Cecil on the Strand in London, they dined at the Hampstead home of John Galsworthy, a Scribner's author whom Fitzgerald had met through Alfred Noyes at Princeton. Tall, austere-looking, with a Roman profile and tightly closed lips, always correctly dressed, Galsworthy would not have looked out of place in Downing Street. In contrast to the easygoing Fitzgerald, Galsworthy was correct, formal, and stiff. Here's the first of, I think, many stories we're going to get about how boorish he was. This is a kid from the Midwest, a Catholic kid, like from the Midwest, well educated, but still like a little rough, a lot of rough.
Right. Well, and also intoxicated.
And a fish out of water.
Right.
During dinner, Fitzgerald, who habitually adopted a self-conscious and self-abasing attitude when encountering established writers, suddenly burst out with, "Mr. Galsworthy, you are one of the 3 living writers I admire most in the world. You and Joseph Conrad," who Galsworthy was friends with, "and Anatole France." He later admitted to Edmund Wilson that Galsworthy had not liked it much. He knew he wasn't that good. But Galsworthy, who was easily as good as Anatole France and later won the Nobel Prize, was probably more embarrassed by Fitzgerald's gauche flattery than dismayed, as Fitzgerald suggested, by his own sad estimation of his work. Though Galsworthy was kind, the host and guests seemed temperamentally at odds with each other, and the evening was not a success. Fitzgerald told Shane Leslie that he was rather disappointed in the older writer and unfavorably compared him to Conrad. "I can't stand pessimism with neither irony nor bitterness." He loved Conrad. Let's see here. On this visit to England, Fitzgerald observed the poor and was entertained by the rich. And so they're in England, and then they go to Oxford, they go to Venice. Let's see here. So he finally gets to Rome. Impelled by piety or by mere curiosity, Fitzgerald had asked Archbishop Dowling of St. Paul to arrange an audience with the Holy Father in Rome. Oh. The Archbishop, acceding to Fitzgerald's request and remembering the family's beneficence, told, "You can give money to the church, and they'll pull in some favors for you. It's an organization. It's a human organization like anything else." Yeah. I mean, and he's St. Paul's, famous son, and he's, abroad, and we're gonna, he told the Vatican official that none have merited more of the church in this city than the Fitzgeralds have through several generations. Staunch, devout, generous. Love it. Though Fitzgerald noted women weeping in Vatican and the loot of 20 centuries, he did not mention seeing the Pope, who by late June may have moved to his summer residence outside Rome. Fitzgerald enjoyed himself hugely in Venice, but had a rotten time in France. Influenced by H.L. Mencken's pro-German attitudes and bitterly disillusioned by the decadent state of post-war Europe, he assumed a superior attitude and condemned Latin culture with an uneasy ferocity that anticipated the rantings of Tom Buchanan in The Great Gatsby. Here's what he said. "God damn the continent of Europe. It is of merely antiquarian interest. Rome is only a few years behind Tyre and Babylon. The Negroid streak creeps northward to defile the Nordic race. Already the Italians have the souls of blackamoors. France made me sick. I think it's a shame that England and America didn't let Germany conquer Europe. It's the only thing that would have saved the fleet of tottering old wrecks. My reactions were all Philistine, anti-socialistic, provincial, and racially snobbish. I believe at last in the white man's burden. We are as far above the modern Frenchman as he is above the Negro."
Jeez. Yeah, that's spicy. That's a little
Were
spicy.
we expecting that from F. Scott? I don't know. Remember, this is Art of Darkness. Yeah. These are complicated people from history.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
And who the hell knows, and presumably his attitudes would have matured and developed over the years. But let's just say that character of Tom Buchanan is not like pulled from the imagination. Let's just say that. Yeah. He went on a rant and he put it in writing. So there you go. Proud of his Philistine thought and bohemian behavior, Fitzgerald told Robert Bridges, the editor of Scribner's magazine, when they returned from Europe that there were legends enough current to supply 3 biographers. And so they came home in July, made a brief visit to Montgomery, and then rented a house on White Bear Lake, right up here, White Bear Lake, Go Bears, about 10 miles northeast of St. Paul. That's where my butcher is, White Bear Butchery. Yeah. I'm not going to make these groveling apologies for his racist attitudes there. The year was what, like 1920. Like, I don't think that should surprise anybody. And if that does surprise you, like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, like, disavow.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Yeah. And then Zelda would meet his parents for the first time. And they would finally have their baby.
Oh, they didn't come to the wedding either, huh? Yeah, I guess.
Oh no. This was a shotgun. Shotgun and a priest with a shotgun in his hand. We're going. Yeah. We're living in sin here. We gotta fix this.
Quick.
Yeah. Okay, so Frances Scott Fitzgerald, at first called Patricia, but always known as Scotty, was born in St. Paul on October 26th of 1921. When Zelda first saw the new baby, she exclaimed, "I hope it's beautiful and a beautiful little fool." A sentence attributed to Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby. Fitzgerald, his telegram to the Sayers hyperbolically announced that their baby daughter had already eclipsed the most dazzling silent film stars. Lillian Gish is in mourning. Constance Talmadge is a back number. And a second Mary Pickford has arrived. Nick Carraway responds in the same witty tone as this telegram when Daisy asks him if they miss her in Chicago. The whole town is desolate. All the cars have left rear wheel painted black as a mourning wreath, and there's a persistent wail all night long along the North Shore. Very funny. In January of 1922, Zelda became pregnant again, but decided not to have another child just after Scotty. Though she had refused to take pills to terminate her pregnancy before she was married, Zelda decided in March to have the first of her 3 abortions in New York.
Eesh.
They're having a Catholic wedding, and then we're gonna roll on and start having some abortions.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, boy.
A cryptic, undated entry in Fitzgerald's notebook grimly states his son went down the toilet of the X hotel after Dr. X pills.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Good.
So I don't know what to say about that. It's pretty dark.
Yeah, I agree.
You could do that. You could maybe like try to practice better, safer sex. Probably. Probably don't want to do that.
Rhythm method.
Yeah, rhythm method.
Spell out.
No.
Something.
Yeah.
Something.
Well, you know the old joke, right? What do you call people who use the pull-out method? Parents.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't know, dude. I mean, it happened. It's here.
Yeah.
Probably didn't help her mental health. Probably. No. She probably had a good reason for it. Didn't want to have more children. Too many children.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Rome in the fall of 1924, an operation to help Zelda conceive caused a lingering infection. So now we've had abortions, and now we're going to try to conceive later. So I think they're just trying to do family planning. They're just trying to go like, let's just slow down.
Yeah.
It's too much. I mean, yeah, I don't love it. I don't love it. Personally, I don't love it. It's not my job to judge, but it's like, what are we doing here? You know? Yeah. Right. And who knows, like, because later she would have a very, very clear, very well recorded probable affair with a French aviator. We're coming up to it. So one has to wonder, was there some funny business going on the side? Like, and if there was, would that maybe, like, this is pure speculation.
Sure.
Total speculation. Yeah. So in any case.
You mean like this is maybe Scott's not the father?
I don't know. They were always together. I don't know. Total speculation. I have no evidence for that, but I'm just sort of like, what do we know? Like, this is something we should say about this podcast. We don't know every single fucking thing that every one of the people we cover and all of their ancillary characters did on every single day of their lives. Yeah. So, there you go. All right. So, she would end up with an infection, and by the fall of 1930, again moving around in time, it damaged her reproductive organs, and she abandoned more hope of telling, and despairingly told Fitzgerald, Dr. Gross said there was no use trying to save my ovaries. I was always sick and having piqûres, injections. Yeah. It is not surprising, in view of her medical history, that Zelda greatly admired Hemingway's fine story, Hills Like White Elephants, in which a selfish man bullies his reluctant girlfriend into having an abortion. So there's some, implication that Fitzgerald was maybe sort of saying, hey, we can't do this too much. It's tough. Yeah. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. Rough one. All right. But they did have Scotty. And again, these were not like parents, like middle-class parents, like our parents were, or you know what I mean? These were like boarding schools and nurses, and, she's not probably even like, I mean, it would finally reach a point where she would be in mental hospitals about 10 years later. So Scotty's still a kid, like a child. Scott would see her like 4 or 5 days a month.
Oh my gosh.
And then the rest was like, we're just paying other people to raise her. So that was the kind of child. I mean, later they would ask Scotty about her mother, and she said, I didn't know her very well.
Ugh.
So, then you think about the abortions, you maybe go, maybe they were like, oh, we're a couple of young, fucked up drunks. Like,
we're not.
Maybe
right.
Not
That's
fit.
that was part of the equation for them, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. How long is my outline? My outline's some 15 pages. I don't even know what page I'm on now. Oh, we're on page 4.
Yeah. That sounds right.
Yeah. You having fun? You having fun?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But tell people what's coming up while I go use the pissoir, as they say.
Sure. Yeah. So we got a lot of things coming up. First things first, very soon we're having the Hamlet bookends reading club, and then same day we're actually having our friend Bernard Joy, who came on previously to talk Faulkner. He is coming on. We're going to talk about a slew of Southern writers about whom Bernard is a bit of an expert. That's going to be about Tennessee Williams, Flannery O'Connor, and probably talk a little Faulkner as well. We've got a dark room coming up with the writer Aaron Birch talking some Dennis Johnson. Another behind the paywall episode, full core episode we did last year was about the life of Dennis Johnson. So go check that out if you're a paid subscriber. Let's see. Also, we're talking soon. Let's see. We've got I'm going to be covering Sylvia Plath in the month of May, so that's going to be very interesting. I think we've got the writer Chris Kelso coming on to talk Kafka some point in the month of May. We've got some guest spots. I'm not going to say too much about those just because getting podcast stuff scheduled, sometimes they just don't happen. And so I don't like to say too much about them if they depend on people other than Kevin and I. So I'll just let you know that we're going to be out there on other channels soon. Let's see what else we got. Oh, coming up this summer, probably in June, we're going to be doing our back-to-back Shakespeare episodes. We're going to get to the bottom of who was William Shakespeare. Was he William Shakespeare? Was he Edward de Vere? Was he Christopher Marlowe? Who are the other people that people think he was? Francis Bacon. We'll probably touch a little bit on all those theories. Yeah.
Some people even have a theory that it was like a collective.
That almost seems reason. I don't even know. I don't know. So we'll find out.
What if Shakespeare was a writer's room? Like a writer's room now writes we're in a vampire show. Vampires are going to be hot again. We're going to get into the zeitgeist. We're going to write about vampires.
Could be.
We're going to make 10 episodes about vampires.
Right.
Yeah.
What if it was an AI?
Artist.
What if it was
I'm an artist.
GPT?
Right. It was Chat GPT out of Francis Bacon's shoe stone, his black show stone.
Yeah, just
AI
channeled anything could happen. Anything could happen.
Yeah. Harold Bloom is turning in his grave. Yale is shaking right now.
Yeah. Well, they ought to.
Right, they ought to be.
Yeah.
You're on notice, Yaleys. Michael Backinson, friend of the show, is the resident
President
Yaley. It's
Yaley.
been a while since we've had him on. We might have to call up old Backinson and have him on.
Yeah,
He was
that'd
a
be
he
good.
was a big part of the show the first like
He
year
was.
year or
Yeah,
two. So
I
yeah,
love
we
Mike.
gotta
Yeah.
look that guy
Yeah.
up. And then I got Abby and I wrote a radio play, so that's coming out this
Ooh,
summer too. So stay tuned.
excellent. Excellent.
That is going to be
Excellent.
fun. Okay, let's see here. All right, we're ready to keep going.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. The Fitzgeralds' marriage was marked by extravagance and strife, with alcohol fueling their social life and private quarrels. Accusations of infidelity strained their relationship further. What did I say?
Yeah.
Leading to a tumultuous summer in Westport, Connecticut. During this time, Zelda became pregnant, and the couple returned to St. Paul for their daughter Scotty's birth in 1921. And Zelda's postpartum remarks would later inspire dialogue in The Great Gatsby. Fitzgerald seems to have been a fine listener. All right. So that's something to note.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanna read a little bit.
Well, and Zelda's got these great little phrases: pink helplessness, beautiful
Mm-hmm.
fool. Like these are
Mm-hmm.
nice little. Yeah. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah, yeah. I think we've already kind of covered this. Let's see here. I like the idea of them in White Bear Lake. That's kind of fun. If you've ever been to White Bear Lake, it's kind of amazing to think of this. So let's read a little bit more from Sometimes Madness is Wisdom. Once resettled in St. Paul, Zelda continued shocking people by standing and smoking in the back of trolleys and using unvarnished language. At the movies, she spoke in a loud voice, declaring, "I think Gilda Gray is the most beautiful girl in the world, don't you?" I should be doing a vaguely Southern accent, but if I were a man, I'd give her a year of my life to live with her for. I'd give a year of my life to live with her for a week. You got to add a little bit. I think there's a little, yeah,
Oh yeah, a little
yeah, yeah, yeah,
smoky,
yeah,
a little
yeah,
southern,
a little drunk, yeah,
a
yeah, a
little
little drunk.
mid-Atlantic, probably like put on
Yep, yep.
sophistication. Yeah.
She particularly enjoyed unsettling the young men she danced with at parties by saying things like, "My hips are going wild. You don't mind, do you?" Zelda would twerk today
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah, she would be
Yeah.
an influencer probably.
Oh, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
it would
Yeah.
be like hashtag like
Yeah.
her sign would be at problematic.
Problematic. Dude. That was good. That was a good one. I'm usually the punster on
You
this
are.
pod.
Yeah.
Old
Yeah.
Pulp is
Yeah.
that was a good one.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
All right. This has been the Fitzgerald part 2. All right. All right. Seemingly overnight, the Fitzgeralds became the focus of St. Paul's social life, attending dinners and Saturday night dances at the University Club and organizing the Junior League's musical review. They rented a house at Dellwood, the resort on White Bear Lake, where Minneapolis society retreated until fall. Later, Zelda wrote of the hordes of people who fled there in her story, The Girl the Prince Liked. When summer came, all the people who liked summertime moved out to the large, clear lake not far from town and lived there in long, flat cottages surrounded with dank shrubbery and pine trees, and so covered by screen verandas that they made you think of small pieces of cheese under large meat safes. All the people came who liked to play golf or sail on the lake or who had children to shelter from the heat. All the young people came whose parents had given them for wedding presents white bungalows hid in the green, and all the old people who liked the flapping sound of the water at the end of their hollyhock walks. All the bachelors who liked living over the cheerful clatter of plates and clinking locker doors in the yacht club basement came, and a great many sun-dried women of 40 or 50 with big families and smart, crisp linen costumes that stuck to the seats of their roadsters when they went to meet their husbands escaping from town in the 5 o'clock heat. It was a resort town, White Bear. I mean, now it's just another kind of
Exurb.
yeah, exurbs. Yeah. Lovely town. Yeah. Go Bears. Scott and Zelda stayed in White Bear Lake until October when they moved back to St. Paul and checked into the Hotel Commodore until Scott's friends, Sandra and Oscar Kallman, arranged for them to lease Arnold Kallman's home at 626 Goodrich Avenue. And then this is the months before birth and then going through the birth. And Scott is working on The Beautiful and the Damned. And he's hanging out. They are in St. Paul. There's some good stories here coming out of this business. Let's see here. He's finishing. He's getting The Beautiful and the Damned published. Brad, I'm going to ask you to read some of that here shortly.
Sure.
And that year, the St. Paul winter was particularly bitter, and Zelda complained to Fowler, "This damned place is 18 below zero, and I go around thanking God anatomically and proverbially speaking, I am safe from the fate of the monkey. It snowed continuously." In a photograph of Zelda taken on her way to the Cotillion Club dance on January 13th, St. Paul, 1922. She appears miserable and half frozen in her gray squirrel coat. By March, she and Scott were eager to return east for the publication of The Beautiful and the Damned, the most autobiographical but least known of Fitzgerald's novels. Focusing on a young woman who craves self-fulfillment through economic and emotional independence, but is married to an insecure man who undermines her ambition and threatens divorce if she pursues a career. It made Gloria Patch the prototype for all women yearning for self-actualization. It also closely foretold what would be Zelda's life story. Securing a $5,600 royalty advance, the Fitzgeralds, and I think we're just 10xing this.
It's
maybe that's not even enough. It's probably like 15x. Probably maybe because I think up to six figures in today's money.
1960 is 10x.
Is that right?
I think so, if I remember right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in any case,
I'll the inflation.
Yeah, look it up. Look it up.
Go.
Get your inflation calculator out, okay? They left Scotty with a nanny and headed for New York. Okay, so there you go. They leave Scotty with a nanny, and that's the life they're going to live. And, okay. All right. So we have a child, but we don't have a child with us.
Right. They exist. Yeah.
Yeah. We're hot to trot. I'd actually like
it's about 15 times. Yeah.
Okay.
15x.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about The Beautiful and the Damned. Do I have that PDF for you, Brad? Yes. I'm going to put it in the chat. I'm going to ask you to read the beginning of this in just a minute. I'm going to give kind of an overview of this because obviously this is very important to talk about the work. Let me just make sure I got you what you need there. Yep. Easy. And I'm just going to ask you to read, the first few paras, but not quite yet.
Yep. Gotcha.
I'm just going to introduce it and you cue it up. And here we go. So The Beautiful and the Damned is a 1922 novel, and this is just Wikipedia, by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's set in New York City, and the novel's plot follows a young artist, Anthony Patch, and his flapper wife, Gloria Gilbert, who become wrecked on the shoals of dissipation. And again, this speaks to what I'm talking about. They glamorize this. They make it look sexy and fun and good, and it is. It is.
For a while.
But for a while. But even Fitzgerald is saying they become wrecked. they destroy themselves, while excessively partying at the dawn of the hedonistic jazz age.
Well, and this one's in the title, The Beautiful and the Damned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. My beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy.
Yeah.
It was his second novel, and it focuses upon the swinish behavior and glittering excesses of the American social elite in the heyday of New York's cafe society. You want to read the first, read us the first, page or two.
Yeah. So let's see. So chapter 1, The Beautiful and the Damned. In 1913, when Anthony Patch was 25, 2 years were already gone since irony, the holy ghost of this later day, had, theoretically at least, descended upon him. Irony was the final polish of the shoe, the ultimate dab of the clothes brush, a sort of intellectual there. Yet, at the brink of this story, he has, as yet, gone no further than the conscious stage. As you first see him, he wonders frequently whether he is not without honor and slightly mad, a shameful and obscene thinness glistening on the surface of the world like oil on a clean pond. These occasions being varied, of course, with those in which he thinks himself rather an exceptional young man, thoroughly sophisticated, well-adjusted to his environment, and somewhat more significant than anyone else he knows. This was his healthy state, and it made him cheerful, pleasant, and very attractive to intelligent men and to all women. In this state, he considered that he would one day accomplish some quiet, subtle thing that the elect would deem worthy, and, passing on, would join the dimmer stars in a nebulous, indeterminate heaven halfway between death and immortality. Until the time came for this effort, he would be Anthony Patch, not a portrait of a man, but a distinct and dynamic personality, opinionated, contemptuous, functioning from within outward, a man who was aware that there could be no honor and yet had honor, who knew the sophistry of courage and yet was brave. Now, I think if I remember right, because I've read this book, he does interesting things in sort of setup and format. So this is still in chapter 1 under the subheading, A Worthy Man and His Gifted Son. Anthony drew as much consciousness of Social Security from being the grandson of Adam J. Patch as he would have had from tracing his line over the sea to the Crusaders. This is inevitable. Virginians and Bostonians, to the contrary, notwithstanding, an aristocracy founded sheerly on money postulates wealth in the particular. Now, Adam J. Patch, the more familiarly known as, quote, Cross Patch, left his father's farm in Tarrytown early in '61 to join a New York cavalry regiment. He came home from the war a major, charged into Wall Street, and amid much fuss, fume, applause, and ill will, he gathered to himself some $75 million. This occupied his energies until he was 57 years old. It was then that he determined, after a severe attack of sclerosis, to consecrate the remainder of his life to the moral regeneration of the world. He became a reformer among reformers. Emulating the magnificent efforts of Anthony Comstock, after whom his grandson was named, he leveled a varied assortment of uppercuts and body blows at liquor, literature, vice, art, patent medicines, and Sunday theaters. His mind.
Okay, I think that's plenty. All right. Okay, good.
I was having too much fun there. Yeah, it's good
doing
stuff.
it. A worthy read. It was received critically kind of with mixed reviews. Like they said it wasn't as groundbreaking as the first novel. Other people noted he's got a brilliant future.
Sure.
But if he doesn't, one reviewer wrote that Fitzgerald had a brilliant future ahead of him in 1920, but unless he does something better, it will be behind him in 1923. All right. And now many literary critics typically consider it to be among his weaker novels. And during the final decade of his life, Fitzgerald remarked upon the novel's lack of quality in a letter to his wife. I wish The Beautiful and the Damned had been a maturely written book because it was all true. We ruined ourselves. I have never honestly thought that we ruined each other. We ruined ourselves. I don't blame you. I hope you don't blame me. So, there you go. I want to give a picture of their move to Long Island, which is important because, of course, of Gatsby. Thank you, Brad. Thank you for reading.
Sure.
First of like 4 of those I'm going to ask you to do. When the Minnesota summer had ended and they had been asked to leave the White Bear Yacht Club, again, they're asked to leave. You can about imagine why. All the rows and the drinking and the Fitzgeralds became utterly weary of wholesome provincial life and unable to face another dreary season of Arctic winds and ice flows. In mid-October 1922, they eagerly returned to the Plaza Hotel, the center of their legendary life in New York. They soon found a comfortable place to rent at 6 Gateway Drive in Great Neck, an affluent town on the north shore of Long Island, about an hour from Manhattan. Alluding to Sinclair Lewis's best-selling satire on the American businessman, Zelda called it our nifty little Babbitt house. All right. And this just goes on to say that in the 1920s, before the film industry moved to Hollywood, many millionaire celebrities from show business, Sam Goldwyn, Eddie Cantor, Ed Wind, Mae Murray, Gene Buck, all these names that like old-timey Hollywood people would recognize, they would live there. They would live in Great Neck. So now they're among all these Hollywood people. Let's see here. This is where he would hear that Scott Fitzgerald was visiting America and staying in the estate of his publisher, Frank Doubleday. And this is in 1923, nearby Oyster Bay. Scott, who had kept a vigil outside Anatole France's house in 1921, now got drunk with Ring. And let me just make sure I cover who this fellow, the sports writer, Ring Lardner. Very famous.
I hear that name all the time, but I don't know anything about him.
He'd be somebody we'd have to cover. I think he's like the sports writer. And they would get drunk and describing it, saying the two congenial neighbors would stay up all night talking and drinking gin until Ring staggered to his feet and announced, "Well, I guess the children have left for school by this time. I might as well go home." His son recalled that his father would often arrive home in a taxi as he was leaving for school and would have to be helped into the house. That's the kind of drinking we're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. In May 1923, Scott heard that Joseph Conrad on a visit to America was staying at the estate of his publisher. Okay. He gets drunk with Ring and, in a typically high-spirited but childish episode, danced on Doubleday's lawn in order to pay homage to the great novelist. But they were apprehended by a vigilant caretaker and thrown off the grounds for trespassing before they could gate crash the house and attract Conrad's attention. Too timid to arrange a serious conversation, Scott did not seem to realize that a drunken dance was not the best way to impress the formal old sea captain who always insisted on correct behavior. Yeah. Okay. All right. So there's a little bit of him, Conrad's here. We're gonna go dance, and then we're gonna go dance for Joseph.
Yeah.
On the lawn.
Joseph Conrad, folks, listen to that episode. He's like one of the most uptight men who ever lived.
Been through absolute hell. Like, literal, absolute hell. There's a bit here saying that the move from New York placed him at like the center of the literary universe, right? It was New York or Paris at the time. And so he would meet John Dos Passos, Wodehouse, Vanwyck Brooks, Carl Van Vechten, Dreiser, and Rebecca West. He would make friends with Dos Passos. Dos Passos first met Scott and Zelda at the Plaza Hotel in October of 1922. They introduced him to Sherwood Anderson, gave him cocktails and champagne, and then asked the shy writer embarrassing questions about his sex life. Anderson left after a lunch of lobster croquettes, and Dos Passos drove out to Great Neck in their chauffeured red touring car to help them search for a house. They had plenty of time to talk that day, and Dos Passos found Fitzgerald interesting despite his intellectual limitations. When he talked about writing, his mind, which seemed to be full of preposterous notions about most things, became clear and hard as a diamond. He didn't look at landscape. He had no taste for food or wine or painting, little ear for music except for the most rudimentary popular songs. But about writing, he was a born professional. Though most writers emphasize Fitzgerald's drunkenness and bizarre behavior, the English humorist P.G. Wodehouse found Scott sober and charming, though rather seedy, when he ran into him at the village train station. As Wodehouse wrote to him,
what does seedy mean? I mean, they kind of know, but like seedy to me is like criminal.
Maybe. Well, I mean, we're talking. To an Englishman, most Americans are seedy.
Okay. There you go.
Okay.
Right.
Are you with me? Like most Americans from the Midwest would be, I'm sure people have thought I'm seedy.
Yeah.
And you are seedy at times, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Probably
a little uncouth, maybe a little disheveled, not
like trashy.
Behave. Yeah, a little down market, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, my head seedy always meant literally like criminal, but it's not. Well, I realize I don't have the right definition.
Your seedy is not somebody else's seedy. Do you know? Yeah. I mean, and of course, and Wodehouse is a comedian too, so he's like a comic writer, a humorist. Yeah. So let's see here. Hang on one second. As Wodehouse wrote to a friend, I have also met F. Scott Fitzgerald. In fact, I met him again this morning. He was off to New York with True, who was doing his play, The Vegetable. We're going to talk about this abortive Broadway play that Fitzgerald did. I believe these stories you hear about his drinking are exaggerated. He seems quite normal and a very nice chap indeed. You would like him. The thing is, he goes to New York with a scrubby chin looking foul. I suppose he gets a shave when he arrives, but it doesn't show him at his best in Great Neck. I would like to see more of him. So basically, like he's unshaved. He's a little, he's been on a bender. He hasn't shaved.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, his top button is undone.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's like, bro, you're in America now. Come on, you're in his turf. Yeah.
Eat a cheeseburger. Just chill out.
Yeah. In contrast to Wodehouse, the wealthy Harvard-educated critic and biographer Vanwyck Brooks remarked on Fitzgerald's unconventional behavior and conspicuous extravagance. After arriving late for a Manhattan dinner party in 1923, the Fitzgeralds promptly fell asleep at the table. Scott went to lie down more comfortably in the living room, but woke up suddenly to take command of the festivities and telephone an order for 2 cases of champagne, together with a fleet of taxis to take us to a nightclub. So that's the kind of
Getting down. We're getting down, son. Yeah.
absolutely.
Watch this,
Yeah.
Van Wick. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we painted a picture of them from that part of the book. All right. So the couple's move to Great Neck, Long Island, brought them closer to Broadway, and the inspiration for Fitzgerald's next novel, The Beautiful and Damned. His play, The Vegetable, flopped despite its initial success, plunging him into financial debt. And this was this is a 1923, and it's called The Vegetable, From President to Postman. All right. Do you know anything about this?
I've never even heard of it.
All right. I'm just going to read a few things from the Wikipedia. Let's see here. In the original publication of The Vegetable, F. Scott Fitzgerald included the following quotation on the title page. Any man who doesn't want to get on in the world, to make $1 million, and maybe even park his toothbrush in the White House, hasn't got as much to him as a good dog has. He's nothing more or less than a vegetable. Fitzgerald used this quotation when he claimed, which he claimed came from a current magazine, as a springboard for his only published play. This comic romp satirizes the ambitions of an ordinary man who wants to be president of the United States. That is, if he cannot make it as a postman. The play concerns the misadventures of the middle-class driver Jerry Frost. He is a 35-year-old clerk for the railroad at $3,000 a year. There you go, $3,000 a year. Which he makes writing a single story. Wow. He possesses no eyebrows, but nevertheless, he constantly tries to knit them. He is stereotypically henpecked by his wife Charlotte, and their marriage is dull. We learn in the first act that Jerry wanted to be a postman, but that he somehow blames his wife for missing out on this ambition. And here's the history of this. I mean, and he was a theater kid from youth, right? So following The Beautiful and the Damned, he hoped to secure financial wealth for him and his wife. The play's text was published in book form by Scribner's in April of 1923. There's a print run of 7,650, which is crazy. A print run of 7,650 for a play that sold at 150. However, according to some critics, the play lacked focus. Its premiere in a single preview, November of 1923, at Nixon's Apollo Theater in Atlantic City, New Jersey, was widely regarded as a disaster. Zelda later wrote in a letter that the audience were so obviously bored, and some walked out during the second act. That's never good. Fitzgerald himself wrote that, I wanted to stop the show and say it was all a mistake, but the actors struggled heroically on. During the second intermission, Fitzgerald and Ring Lardner asked the lead actor, Ernest True, are you going to stay and do the last act? The actor replied that he was, at which the pair of writers retorted that they were heading to a bar down the street.
He walked out of his own play.
Apparently. He claimed to be proud of the work. He had hoped it would succeed. The critical and public reaction to the first and only performance left the author in a deep depression, followed by a drinking binge. Well, it was, however, revived years later and produced by Lenox Hill Players, Inc. at the Cherry Lane Theater, New York, April 10th, 1929. It ran for only 13 performances.
Okay.
All right. Hey, if anybody wants to do The Vegetable now, it's in the public domain.
There you
go. Maybe my theater company will do it. Badmouth Theater Company, badmouthtc.com. Maybe we'll do this. This would be fun.
Give it a read before you commit.
Yeah, well, it is. Listen. If it has 2 intermissions and we have a bar going, I think this could be good. I think this could be a fun experience. Yeah.
Now, would a fun concept for a play would actually be about Ring Lardner and F. Scott Fitzgerald watching The Vegetable. That would that's got some juice to it.
Sure, right. Like you embed The Vegetable inside your new play about F. Scott. That's not a bad idea, Brad. It's almost like you're a writer. You give these ideas away for free to people on our podcast. You got to stop giving stuff away for free. like on the Desaad episode, there is a banging idea for an app called Sod. And I'm not going to say what it does, for the hoi polloi. You got to get on the
No.
Patreon for that,
I mean,
dude.
it could make us millions.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
No.
Yeah. If this podcasting thing doesn't work out, we're going to start making apps based off of the Marquis de Sade. Yeah. So here's a little more about this. This is from the premiere or the preview or whatever it is. The first act went fine, but Ernest says he has never had an experience on stage like the second. I heard one woman hit the roof when the Bible was mentioned. They seemed to think it was sacrilegious or something. People were so obviously bored. Then Fitzgerald described the event. It was a colossal frost. People left their seats and walked out. People rustled their programs and talked audibly in bored, impatient whispers. After the second act, I wanted to stop the show and say it was all a mistake, but the actors struggled on. Unreal. And that tryout closed after 1 week. And then a director wanted to revive it in 1936. Fitzgerald said, it reads well, but there's some difference between the first and second acts that is so disparate that every time a little theater has produced it, and many of them have tried, it has been a failure in a big way. The drama critic Martin Esslin, who had a higher opinion of the play than Fitzgerald, thought the experimental second act must be regarded as an early example of the theater of the absurd, at least in the middle part, which gives a grotesque nonsense version of life at the White House. But he agreed with the author that its attempt to leave the naturalistic convention fails by remaining firmly anchored within it during the first and third acts. And that was his first professional setback. And he realized he could no longer count on everything being a success or continue to drink and spend without suffering the consequences. In a confessional letter to Perkins, he criticized his dependence on Zelda and lack of self-confidence and accused himself of laziness, referring everything to Zelda, a terrible habit. Nothing ought to be referred to anybody till it's finished. Word consciousness, self-doubt. He suddenly realized how much I've almost deteriorated in the 3 years since I finished The Beautiful and Damned, and vowed to change his habits and become more serious. If I'd spent this time reading or traveling or doing anything, even staying healthy, it'd be different, but I spent it uselessly, neither in study nor in contemplation, but only in drinking and raising hell generally. On one chaotic occasion, for example, the drunken Scot had suddenly stood up at a dinner party, torn the cloth off the table, and stormed out of the room amid the clatter of broken glass. Zelda, maintaining her sang-froid, turned to her guests and politely asked, "Shall we have our coffee in the next room?"
Yeah.
Okay. They're codependent. They're a mess. A little more here. Fitzgerald was unable to control his enormous expenses and live on the extraordinarily high income of $36,000 a year. What's X15 that? That's 500. What is like $500,000?
Yeah, it's
450.
Yeah, 450
or
to 500,
470. 475.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you can't live off that,
If you can't make
you're
ends
such
meet
a disaster.
doing that,
Disaster. Yeah. About 20 times more than the average American earned. Perkins, like Menkins, blamed Zelda and wrote, Scott was extravagant, but not like her. Money went through her fingers like water. She wanted everything. She kept him writing for the magazines. Fitzgerald had counted on the vegetable to bring in a small fortune. Yo, this play is going to set us up forever, honey. I've written a play with 2 intermissions called The Vegetable. We're going to be made. It's going to run on Broadway for 30 years.
Doesn't even have a good title.
No.
I mean, no.
When it failed, he was forced to go on the wagon and write himself out of debt. No writer wants to go on the wagon and have to write himself out of debt. What a nightmare.
I did get into this business to
I didn't become a writer to become sober. You want me to become sober?
Ridiculous. I might as well go back to writing ad copy. This is a bunch of
I can write ad copy drunk. You're expected to be drunk as an ad man.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So working in a large bare, badly heated room over the garage on Gateway Drive. You have to be so profligate and so wasteful. I mean, to burn through this kind of money. I mean, this is a disaster. He took 2 days to turn out a 7,000-word story that paid the rent and the most pressing bills. He then worked 12 hours a day for 5 weeks to rise from abject poverty back into the middle class. Probably exaggerating, but then also probably not.
Yeah.
By March of 1924, he had earned $16,500 from magazine stories, paid off his debt to Harold Ober, and financed a trip to Europe. Okay, that does kind of rock.
That's pretty badass.
Yeah. That does rock.